Stanford University.
Welcome to the 16th and final lecture of Stanford CS 193P, spring quarter of 2021. It's all final project for all of you from here on in. This is week 2 of this 3-week project, so hopefully you've made significant progress. This lecture is going to be all about multi-platform support. Specifically, we're going to get Emoji Art up and running on the Mac as a native Mac OS application. And you're going to be surprised by a couple of things. I think one is how powerful of a UI you get for dealing with documents with the SwiftUI document architecture on the Mac, and also how much of our iOS code just works almost with no modification on the Mac. And for the stuff that doesn't work, you're going to see some tips and tricks for how to adapt your code to be as cross-platform as possible. So without further ado, let's get right into that demo. Our last demo of the quarter is that we're going to build a multi-platform version of Emoji Art, one that runs on iOS, of course, iPhones and iPads, but also on Mac OS. And it's going to build it as a native Mac OS application. Now we're going to create a single project for this with a lot of shared code, and yes, with some if-thens in there for sure, because the two platforms, Mac OS and iOS, they're just simply not the same. They don't have exactly the same kind of interaction from users, etc. So we are going to have them be different. And we're also not going to have our goal be to build a full Mac version of Emoji Art here. Our goal is really just to understand some strategies that we can use to have a shared code base between the two and get as much stuff working as we can today. Now, one thing I really recommend when you're doing a multi-platform app is to start with a fresh app and use the template that's provided by Xcode to get yourself started, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to close my iOS version of Emoji Art here, and in fact, I'm going to go to my developer directory here, and I'm going to change the name of this to be Emoji Art iOS because it's my pure iOS version. I'm going to create a brand new one, which is the multi-platform version, and I'll be dragging a lot of files out of this iOS version into my cross-platform version because I've already done a lot of great work here so far. So let's go back to Xcode and create a new project. And this project is going to be multi-platform, and it is a document app still. We're still doing all that same document stuff that we did, so we want that. The product name, I'm going to call it Emoji Art. I renamed my other one, so now I can call this one Emoji Art. And we'll put it in the same place, developer here. And here's what it's done for me. Of course, we still have our main Emoji Art app here with the document group and all that because this is a document-oriented app. It gave me kind of a little example document, but we have our own Emoji Art document from iOS, and we're going to replace all of this right here. And similarly, it has a content view because they always give you a little content view. We have our Emoji Art document view. We don't need any of that. What's interesting here is we get a different info plist for the two platforms, and that's because info plist, that's project settings. A lot of that is platform specific, as you're going to see. And macOS also has this thing called entitlements, and these are essentially security settings that make it so that your application can do certain things or not do certain things, somewhat similar to the privacy settings we had in the info.plist for the camera and things like that. The Mac OS entitlements are a little, stronger kind of security things. When you're on an iOS device, you're the only user on the whole device. It's a little different environment. In the Mac, you're talking about a full operating system where you can access the network and all kinds of things. So you want to make sure that apps are clear about what they're entitled to do and not entitled to do. All right, so our first step in this thing is going to be to bring all that code from our iOS version into here. So let's open up both of them at the same time. I'm going to go open recent, my iOS version, here it is, and I'm going to drag all of this stuff in. Now, content view in here I don't need, we can just completely delete that one. And this emoji art app right here, I'm going to copy the contents of my iOS version into here. So we want the emoji art app, it's right here. You just literally copy and paste on here. There's no changes actually required in here to make that work. And similarly with this emoji art document, I'm going to do the exact same thing here to iOS. Well, here's my document. Let's just copy this entire view model over here. That's a good start with the things that already exist in here. And next, let's go grab all the files that are new to this template over here, iOS, and that's pretty much all of these files, except for we already did the document and the app. All right, so let's pick those up, drag them in here, drop them. Definitely want to copy them. And notice this add to targets. It's saying, are all these things you dragged in going to apply to both building an iOS app and a macOS app? Well, to start, yes, but we're going to have to change that because some of these things that I dragged in just make no sense on macOS, and we're going to have to note that. And the last thing I want to make sure I do when I'm copying over is the info plist stuff. Now, when we did that template, we got this little default document types here, which is plain text, opening of plain text. So I don't want any of that. I'm delete that. My imported type identifiers, don't want that. And this doesn't have any exported ones, so that's good. And that's for both platforms. Get rid of this document type there, imported type identifier there. Instead, we want the one from our version over here. So let's go over to our iOS version. Go to info plist, and here's our document types, for example. I'm going to copy here and go over here to paste, and I'm pasting it in the iOS version, and I'm going to paste it also in the macOS version, both of those versions. Let's go back. That was our document types. Now let's go and get our imported type identifiers. Copy that, paste over here, and on the Mac as well, paste. And finally, let's go and get our exported type identifiers. Copy here, paste over here, and in iOS also paste. So I believe that Sports Document Browser is already set for us on iOS, so that's the only thing we set here. Oh, we had our camera thing. Yeah, we should go grab the camera one. Go over here, get our camera. Where is that? Of course, there's no camera on the Mac, so we only need to put that in the iOS version of info.plist. So info plist copying stuff can be something easily that you miss because you kind of, oops, forgot about that. But we definitely do want our emoji art document type and all that stuff going on here. And I found that there's one other thing related to documents that is necessary on the Mac only, which is inside here when we're defining our document types and all that. There's another little line that we need to include in here, which is CF bundle type role. And we're going to say that we are an editor. I'm not quite sure why this is on the Mac. We already have this owner thing, but if we don't put this role in there on the Mac info plist, it seems like it complains. It seems to work, but it kind of complains. So we'll put that in there just to get rid of that complaint in the console. Okay, now we've copied our entire app over here. Now it's time to start building for the Mac. Now, building for the Mac is just a matter of going up to the top and just the same place we chose our simulators or our device in iOS, we're going to pick the Mac and try and build for the Mac. Now, of course, when I hit build, we're going to have a lot of problems because we're trying to do a lot of iOS stuff on the Mac. So let's go through these problems kind of one by one that we see over here and fix them. Try to find strategies that we can use to clean up all of these problems over here. So start at the top. It says cannot find type UI image. Of course, so UI image is only in iOS. There's no UI image in macOS. However, there is something called NS image. And we're going to find that when you go from iOS to Mac. Some things that exist on iOS that are UI something, the old UI kit things, are available in the Mac. Similar things, not exactly the same, but similar, but they're called NS on the Mac. So I'm going to do something kind of interesting here for the UI images. I'm going to type alias UI image to be NS image on the Mac. And that's going to essentially be like a search and replace of UI image with NS image everywhere. Now, this is not going to quite work everywhere because, again, UI image and NS image are not exactly the same, but they're similar. Now, where would I put such a type alias? And where in my code would such a type alias go? Well, that type alias is only going to be on the Mac, so I'm going to put it in a new file down here in this folder. This folder down here has my info plist for the Mac, and this one has my info plist for iOS, but I could put more files down here. And I'm going to create a platform-specific file in here. I'm just going to call it macOS.swift. So let's go File, New File. It's a Swift file, regular Swift file, not a Swift UI view. You could click macOS here, but that's really just giving the different templates. I don't think the Swift file here is really any different than the Swift file right there because if you look at it, it just imports Foundation. So I'm going to call this macOS.swift, and here it is. It's going to be doing UI stuff eventually, so let's go ahead and put Swift UI in here. And I'm going to say type alias UI image equals NS image. I've just redefined it. This seems kind of like a weird thing to do, but it actually kind of makes a lot of sense. So let's build now, see what happens. All right, it's not complaining about UI image anymore. So we can kind of move on to the next thing. What is that? PH Picker controller. Oh, this is that photo library UI kit thing that we added. And the photo library, no, not on Mac. Okay, and the camera also not on Mac. These things don't exist there. So that one's easy. I'm just going to take my camera right here and drag it down only to be in iOS. And same thing with my photo library, only in iOS. And then I'm going to click on them and go over here and say that they are only going to be built for iOS. So this photo library, only iOS, camera, only iOS, and this macOS.swift, only macOS. So just putting a file in this folder doesn't mean it's only going to be built for that platform. You still have to click on it and bring up this little inspector on the side and set its target membership. Notice the info plist, and you don't really have to do it for those. Okay, so that's good. Fix that photo library and camera thing at least a little bit. Let's go back and build again. All right, edit mode is unavailable. Yes, well, edit mode, in fact, is unavailable. The whole thing of dragging things up and down in a list and clicking to delete and all that, it's not a thing on the Mac. And that's probably the main part of Emojiart's apps UI that we're going to have to kind of rebuild for the Mac because we can't do this whole edit mode here. That pretty much makes our whole palette manager useless. So the palette manager also going to end up going down to be iOS only. All right, let's build again. So what else we got here? Horizontal size class. Oh yes, horizontal size class. That's the thing where when we're in portrait on an iPhone or we're kind of squeezed for space on an iPad, we are looking to see if we're in this horizontal size class. Well, on the Mac, we're never squeezed. On Mac, we can always make our window bigger so we don't have this issue. Now, how might we work around this? This is a case where I'm going to use a nice little if that lets us make our code be dependent on a certain operating system. So here I'm going to say # if my OS is iOS, then I'm going to do this whole thing. Else, I'm going to do essentially let compact equal false because we're never compact on the Mac. Now, as soon as I do this, you notice that this stops complaining, and that's because we are currently building or for the Mac, and so it's not even looking at this. If I switch back to iOS, we could make sure that it's still building over here, which it is. That's good because these lines of code still work. So we're going to start going back and forth between macOS and iOS as we fix all these bugs one by one here. All right, what's next? Palette Manager. Of course, we took Palette Manager and we put it down here in iOS only. So now this line of code doesn't work. Now here, we could do if OS, iOS in here as well. But I'll show you another strategy that we can do for things in here, which is down in our Mac OS specific one. We could also type alias palette manager to be empty view. So now palette manager over here in our chooser is just going to be empty view, and that's fine. However, we still don't want to be trying to put up a sheet with an empty view on the Mac. So this doesn't really solve the problem. It just makes this line of code compile without having to have an ugly if OS iOS here. But we still do need an if OS iOS where we put this up, where we set this managing. So where do we set this managing? Let's search for it. Here it is. This is the manager button in our context menu of our chooser. Here we are going to say if the OS is iOS, then allow the user to do manager, otherwise do not. All right, so that takes care of our palette manager. What else do we got in here? How about this one? Okay, optional image. So optional image is the thing we use to put up the background image in our emoji art document view. And it's calling a constructor here, an initializer with the argument UI image. Well, I did that type alias that made it so UI image is NS image, but on the Mac, this constructor is image NS image. Okay, it's NS image, not UI image. So I could do # if again here. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add this UI image initializer on the Mac only, and it's going to call the NS version of this. So let's go back over here to our Mac OS. I'm going to make an extension to image. I'm going to add the initializer called UI image. Takes UI image, and what it's going to do is self.init NS image with the UI image. And since we're doing this type alias, this is all going to do the right thing. So if we build here, now we are not having that error anymore. All right, how about UI device here? This UI device, this is where we are wrapping in navigation to make dismissible. Now, this whole dismissible thing also doesn't matter on the Mac, because in the Mac, it's kind of like the iPad, we can tap away to dismiss things that we present in sheets and popovers. So this whole thing right here really doesn't need to be in our utilities view. Let's put this in an iOS specific platform file. So just like we have a macOS.swift, let's go here and create an iOS.swift. New file, Swift file, iOS.swift, I'm going to call it. And in here, import Swift UI, and we're going to put this extension to view only in here. Now it's complaining here because again, I have to say that this iOS Swift file is only for iOS. As soon as I make it only iOS, it's not even going to try and compile this when we're building for Mac OS up here. So the only problem here is that we do use wrapped in navigation view to make dismissible over here in our chooser. Where is that? That's where we do our editor right here. So now this is clearly not going to work on the Mac because we made this function be only in iOS. But there's no reason we can't have a version of this on the Mac that just does nothing, right? And when you have a view modifier function like thing, especially here, it's really easy to do nothing. You just return self from this function. So let's go over to here, grab this thing, go over and put it on the Mac. It's an extension to view. But on the Mac, we're not going to do any of this stuff in here. We'll just return self. Now this will compile perfectly fine on the Mac, and it will do nothing over here. So that's a good way. In fact, view modifiers in general are a pretty good way to have platform-specific behavior and collect it over here into one file. And that's an interesting strategy trade-off, whether you try to collect things over here into this one platform-specific file, or whether you're doing the if OS, Mac OS, or if OS, iOS things scattered out throughout your code. If I go search over here and say if OS, I can find all these if OS things that I put in here, like there's no palette manager right there, and we don't do horizontal size class. But if you put them over here in macOS.Swift, well, it's all right here. You can see all your platform specific stuff right here. So kind of a trade-off design-wise. Let's keep building, see what we got next. Camera, can't find camera. Okay, well, we moved the camera and the photo library down here to iOS, but we're still referring to this concept here of a camera and a photo library. Again, I could, if OS, iOS for these things, but I'll show you one other way to do this, which is maybe we go over here to Mac OS and define those two symbols to essentially do nothing. It's very similar to what we were doing with the view modifiers, but here we're going to do it with the whole view. So I'm going to create a view here. I'm going to call it my can't do it photo picker, and it's a view. And of course it has a var body, some view, and since it can't do it, that's an empty view. And we're going to make it so that it works in exactly the same way. So it's going to have this var handle picked image, which is a UI image void. And it's even going to have this is available static, but it's always going to be false on the Mac. So now I have a can't do it photo picker that I can type alias my camera to be a can't do it photo picker. And I can also type alias my photo library to be a can't do it photo picker. And this is going to work nicely because we have this is available. This might not be a great strategy if you didn't have this is available, because you're kind of hiding the behavior, and you certainly would never want an empty view to be presented, but the is available we'll kind of skip that. And one thing to remember also, this is a demo. I'm trying to show you lots of different ways to make your code be disabled on one platform, enabled on another platform, and this is a way to do it with an entire view right here. This, again, different strategies how you would do it here, but that's definitely going to make it so this error we had over here is going to work, because camera now is defined on the Mac. It's just this struct that is available is always false, and it never does anything. So if we build here, get rid of that. Ooh, it's getting quite a short list here. How about this one? UI image JPEG data. Oh, what a bummer. So one of the differences between UI image and NS image on the Mac is that there's no JPEG data function. So converting an image to some data, different on iOS and Mac OS. On Mac OS, we use things like TIFF representation and other functions that can do this, convert it to data, but it's just not the same function. We could try and maybe define JPEG data over on the Mac, but if we're going to call it JPEG data, it better be JPEG data. And I'm not a Mac developer, but I don't really know of an easy way to take an image on the Mac and turn it into JPEG. It probably is a way, but it's a good opportunity for me to show you a different way, which is to abstract a concept. We're going to abstract a concept away, and then we're going to implement it differently. And the abstraction I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new var to image called image data. So this image data is going to return a data representation of this image. And on iOS, we're going to use JPEG representation of it. And on Mac OS, we're going to use TIFF. Okay, TIFF is a file format very commonly used, especially historically, on the Mac. So I've made an abstraction here by inventing this new var. So let's hop on over to our two platform-specific files and implement that. So this is an extension to UI image on both platforms. We're type aliased on the other one, so it's really an extension to NS image. So I'm just going to have it be a var called image data, returns a data, possibly nil if we can't do it. And on iOS, it's going to be this JPEG data 1.0 compression quality JPEG. This same thing is going to happen over on the Mac, except for that on the Mac, we're going to use a different function here, TIFF representation, which does return a data version of a UI image, actually an NS image. So that's another way to do cross-platform, is to create abstractions that can be implemented differently on both platforms. So let's build here. I got rid of that. Ooh, the pasteboard. All right, well, pasteboard is definitely different on the two platforms. There's an NS pasteboard, but it's not exactly the same. It doesn't have exactly these same functions. So let's do another abstraction here. Let's have an abstraction for the pasteboard. Now this time, I'm not just abstracting a single function right here, this image data. I'm going to actually abstract a whole new struct. I'm going to call it pasteboard. And this new pasteboard struct is going to abstract away the ways that I use a pasteboard between the two platforms. So what ways do I use the pasteboard? Let's go back and look. I get an image off the pasteboard, right? It's image data, and I also get a URL off the pasteboard. So in my pasteboard abstraction, I'm going to have a var that does this, gets an image, and a var that does the URL, even though we do that differently on the two platforms. Let's go to iOS and do that one first. On iOS, let's have a static var image data to get the image data off of the pasteboard. And so on iOS, we would use UI pasteboard.general.image, just like we were doing right there, and get the image data out of that. I can even use this one I've already defined up here. And similarly, for the image URL that we might want to get off there, the URL at UI pasteboard, general URL, and it will use that image URL function that, remember, this thing grabs the actual image URL out of a complicated Google URL or whatever. So now I've implemented this completely brand new pasteboard struct. It only has these two static vars, but that abstracts the concept of pasteboard away. And we have to do exactly the same thing over on the Mac side. So let's do that. And here we're going to implement both of these in using Mac versions of how to do this. So how do we get image data on the Mac? Well, there's NS pasteboard on the Mac, and it also has this general idea. But to get the data, we use this function data for type. I'm going to get TIFF data in this case to stay in this TIFF world. Although let's also, if there's no TIFF on there, let's also do general.data for type .png. So we're doing TIFF and PNG instead of JPEG. I'm kind of intentionally doing this differently so that you can see that we're abstracting something different. And it's quite different to get a URL. You actually do that on the Mac by creating an NS URL from the NS pasteboard.general. And here I'm going to have to say as URL because this thing right here that creates this URL is an NS URL, and I want it to be a regular Swift kind of URL. And then if I'm able to do that, we'll still do that image URL business. So you can see here, created this pasteboard abstraction. It's quite different on the two platforms how to do this. Looks like I might have, oh, this does not want to be as question mark. The reason this is not as question mark, by the way, because NSURL can always be ased to URL. These two types, URL and NSURL, are bridged. So you never do have to do as question mark there. This is a guaranteed conversion here. And this is an optional NSURL, and this is an optional URL. All right, now that I have this pasteboard abstraction, I can go back and fix my problems over here where I'm using the pasteboard to use these abstractions. Instead of doing this iOS specific one, I'm just going to say pasteboard.imagedata. And this one is pasteboard.imageURL. Again, abstraction here. Compiles fine. Now on Mac OS, make sure. Yeah, no complaints there. And let's just hop over to iOS, make sure we're still building over here. Yep, looking good. Okay, back to the Mac and build. Okay, we're down to our last thing, I think, which is, this load objects thing. Yeah, okay, so this is a problem for sure on the Mac. The way we do drag and drop of images, not URLs. URLs is not complaining. That's going to work fine. We're going to be able to drag and drop a URL on the Mac for our background. That's going to be kind of cool. But images, the way we do it on iOS is we use this load objects and this an item provider thing, but there's no item provider for NS images. Unfortunately, NS Image does not do this item provider thing. I'm not a Mac developer, so I don't really know exactly how you do drag and drop with NS Image. I know it's possible, but it's not done by just saying, type NS Image here. That unfortunately does not seem to work. So this is one where I'm going to have to if OS iOS it, and we're just not going to have drag and drop of images. Again, we do have URLs, so we can still drag and drop our background on the Mac, but it's going to always be doing it as a URL. And oh my gosh, no build time issues here. Whew, it's time to cross our fingers and try and run this app on the Mac. Here we go, ready? And see, I got my Mac. My Mac is selected as the thing to run it on, and run. Wow, it's already asking me, where's that emoji art document you want to open up here? I've actually created a couple here, but I'm going to choose new document. There it is. Woo, a new document. This is a normal iOS kind of emoji art document, but it's on macOS. And this is very much a macOS app. Look at this emoji art, file new, open recent, close, save, even edit, undo, and redo when we start doing things. I'll show you these tabs when we have multiple documents right there, switching windows. I mean, this looks very much like a Mac app. And I can do things like picking these things up, dragging and dropping them here. Oh no, it's not working. Why is it not accepting my drop? Well, here's our first problem that compiles fine, but doesn't work fine on the Mac. This is a really easy one to fix, luckily, but it's a little like you might be wondering, wow, why didn't it do it? But let's go look at the code that does drop. It's up here. Here's our drag and drop. And the problem turns out to be that on the Mac, when you're doing drag and drop, the uniform type identifier you want here is not plain text. You want UTF-8 plain text. So this is the same format like JSON is in, etc. And luckily, it works on iOS too. So if we change this to UTF-8, we don't have to do anything special for Mac or iOS. This will just work. Let's try that. All right, here we go. Drag and dropping. Woo, it worked. We can even move it around. That's good. I'm using my trackpad here, pinching on my Mac to resize. So that's working really well. What about paste? See if that works. No image currently on the pasteboard. Indeed. So we'll try that a little bit here. And how about undo? Yeah, redo. Very nice. But really, undo, redo, we don't want these things here on Mac OS because edit has undo and redo up here. So we don't need to have undo and redo be these buttons right here. So let's get rid of that. We're going to do that by going back here to our document view. Here's where we do undo and redo right here. I'm going to say this is if OS iOS only. All right, we're making good progress here. All right, what about, well, our palette chooser, interesting. Couple of things not so good about this. One, this is really ugly right here. The Mac is trying to put its standard border around this button. Really, we just want this to be only the icon. But that's something that's only on Mac. So we're going to have to figure out some way to make this be just a plain button without this border only on Mac. The other thing I don't really like is on the Mac, the scroll bar comes up to scroll, right? On iOS, we didn't have a scroll bar because we would just pick it up and move it, but we can't do that on the Mac. It's just a different idiom for scrolling. The Mac is just not that kind of scrolling. So it's great that Mac is adjusting nicely and putting its scroll bar in there, but it means as we tap through and we get to some ones that don't have a scroll bar, this shrinks down. So it's kind of getting bigger and smaller as we do this. So I really want to have the size of this big enough so that it fits the scroll bar at all times. But again, only on the Mac. So how are we going to do this? Let's go work on this button and try and make it just a plain button on the Mac. We do that in our chooser over here. And, where is our palette control button? Here's our palette control button here. I want to do something on my palette control button here along the lines of plain button on Mac only or something like that. I'd like a view modifier that just modifies this palette control button to be plain but on Mac only. And we can do this. This is not that dissimilar to what we did with the other view modifier like function. Can absolutely create an extension to view that does the plain button on the Mac, and on iOS we'll create this as well, and it'll just return self. So let's go do this on the Mac. We'll go down here and put it inside this extension view we already have. Func plain button on Mac only returns some view. And how do we do plain button? This works on both platforms. So we're going to say self.button style, and one of the button styles you can choose is plain button style. And I also want the foreground color of this, though, to be the accent color because I still want it to look like a button. And so I want it to have this button accent color here as well. Well, that's cool. Let me do the same thing, this plain button Mac on the iOS side. It's the top of these right here. But on this one, again, it's just going to return self and not do that plain button. Let's see if that works. Woo, woohoo, looking good right here. Tapping on it right there. Now, what about this issue where we want this to be taller all the time? An easy way to do that would be to put some padding around this button. And we already are doing this little plain button on Mac only function for that control button. So maybe I would just put in here and say .padding .vertical. Okay, and we'll see if that just fixes the problem. Yeah, there it is. It's making it tall enough to fit that. And as I tap through, this is now the thing defining the height of this space, working like a charm. However, to be absolutely correct here, we really shouldn't be calling this plain button on Mac only, because this is no longer just a plain button. It's really the control button. We want this padding only on the control button. So don't give your little view modifiers here that do platform specific behavior generic names like this when they're specific things. But there's no reason we couldn't call this, instead of plain button on Mac only, palette control button style. Because that's what this is. This is the button style, including the padding that we want for the palette control. And then again, over here on iOS, same thing, but the palette control button style is just the default style. So there's nothing to do here. So naming matters. Pick your names well so that people who are reading your code here will understand that this is the palette control button style that's being applied to this button. I think we're almost done. Let's take a look at some of the rest of our UI here on the Mac. Here's our clicking works to do this, but I'm pressing and holding. Oh, this is not putting up my context menu. That's because on the Mac, you don't press and hold. You right click. There it is, right click. Go to sports. Ooh, working. How about delete? Sports are gone. No more sports. How about edit? Oh, well, interesting. Well, this is my palette editor. It doesn't look very good. It's almost good, but man, look how it's smashed up against the edges there. I really don't like that. I want this to have a little bit of padding, but I can't put padding back on my iOS version because the iOS version already pads it because it looks quite different there. So how can I put padding here only on the Mac? Well, I'm guessing that I need to put this padding on any popover on the Mac. I don't think there's anything special about this palette editor popover. All the popovers probably need it. So let's go back to our platform specific stuff and add a new func popover padding. Turns some view. And on the Mac, I'm on the Mac here, I'm going to return self dot padding horizontal. So I'm going to give horizontal padding. But popover padding on iOS is just going to be, again, return self. We're not going to do anything different for popovers. Now, I'm not 100% sure that this is always true, that on the Mac you want to add some horizontal padding on your popovers, but it seems to be the case. And as we started debugging and making this really work on the Mac for sure, we would certainly find out. But let's go and apply that to our palette editor. Where is our palette editor? It's right down here. Here's our palette editor. And so we will say dot popover padding. Let's take a look at that. All right, go here, right click, edit. Ooh, okay, that looks a lot better. However, I do notice that I didn't get my little arrow and it's kind of up in the middle of nowhere here. It does seem to work, and after I clicked on it, oh, it jumped back down here. So something not quite right here, and I don't know if this is a Swift UI problem or something in my code that is not doing this right on the Mac, but you can see that even once you convert a UI to work, and this looks really nice here, it still might have some work to do cross-platform to really make things go. All right, we have a little bit more to test. Okay, our palette chooser seems to be working pretty darn well. Notice no manager in here, so we can't change the order, for example, or the only way to delete things is using delete in here. So the manager, not having the manager is not a big deal here. Maybe we would just decide, it's good enough. You just have to deal with these always being in this order right here, because you can still delete and edit and all that. It doesn't take away that functionality. The last big piece, of course, emoji art is the background. So let's go get our Safari. Go look for countryside cartoon backgrounds. It's our favorite thing to search for. And what if we want this background right here? Well, we can just go get both of these things on screen at the same time, pick it up. It's saying green plus. That's because we can drag this as a URL. It says, oh, background new fetch couldn't load it right there. So why is it unable to open this URL? Well, that's back to our entitlements. Again, on Mac, you can't just go around willy-nilly accessing the system. You need to ask for and essentially be granted the entitlement to do that. And accessing files of the network is one of those entitlements, as is reading files. You can see out of the file system, we already have that entitlement. So let's add that entitlement. We're going to add row here. It's com.apple.security.network.client, and this is a Boolean, which we want to be yes or 1 there. And so adding these entitlements, again, I'm not a Mac expert programmer, but this is something I think you have to sort of monitor as you're writing your application and making sure you have the right entitlements. Well, let's see if that fixes our problem here. All right, back to Safari. Grab this guy again and try. Whoa, it worked. It's nice, and we can zoom in and out. We can move it around. We can add a little bad weather. Very nice. How about copy and paste right here? Okay, there's no image on the pasteboard. Oh, let's go over here and copy this image address. That's the URL to it. Actually, I'd better do something different. How about this one? Copy image address. Go over here, paste. Woo, we got that one. And can we do undo to go back? Yes, we can. So it looks like the Mac working pretty well. What's cool about the Mac, of course, we can resize things. We can save this. I'm going to hit Command S to save. Want the name, we'll call this Countryside. Save it. There it is. Maybe we could make a new document. Okay, we'll have this one be this image. Grab a new image for that. How about this one? It looks like this is a kind of windy thing going on here. Sweating in the sun right there. And we'll save. Call this one windy. And one thing that's really cool on the Mac, not only do you get these multiple windows, of course, I can have multiple windows up at the same time. I can even collect them all into tabs. If you go here to show tab bar, then you get these tabs in here, and you can add another thing in the tab right there. You can also show all tabs. It'll let you pick which image you want in the tabs. So it's really quite a powerful user interface for document-oriented apps that you get kind of for free with Swift UI. And it was pretty amazing too how much of our iOS code was able to just work on the Mac. All right, that is it. Not only for this lecture, but for the entire quarter. You should all be working on your final projects now. If you have any questions on that, do not hesitate to ask questions in Piazza. And so I will see you there.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.